I receive a lot of questions on my YouTube channel about my bike fleet. So a while ago I made a video that showed the entire bike fleet. The bike fleet has changed a little bit, so I'm going to make a part 2 video to this. And I still have 4 bikes in the fleet, but the main change that I made was I removed the road bike and replaced it with a gravel bike. Having 4 bikes covers the entire spectrum of riding that I like to do, from cross-country mountain bike racing and riding, to riding mountain bikes up in the mountains on vacations, to cyclocross racing, and long gravel rides. So in this video, I'm going to show each bike. I'll talk about how I have it set up, and I'll also talk about how I use and how I ride each bike. So let's get started. I will start with the cross-country bike. This is a Giant Anthem. It's an aluminum frame. This is a custom build, so I bought the frame and then every component. I have carbon wheels on this bike. I have it set up as a 1x11, and I do have actually a road cassette on this because the trails that I ride locally are not do not have sustained climbs, so I can get away with this gearing, which goes from an 11 up to a 32. I do have a 34 chain ring on the front. So this of course is my cross-country bike. I used to do a lot of cross-country racing. I've switched my racing over to cyclocross. I had to pick one because our seasons here in Florida are in September. They start in September and go through December. So you really have to pick between mountain biking and cross if you want to kind of specialize in one. So this bike does not really see a lot of big mountain type riding. I use my Trance, which I'll show here at the end of the video. But this bike, and I've mentioned this in my other videos, but I went with an aluminum frame on this Giant because I wanted to really put the money into the wheels. And so this has the Stans Valor wheels. I do have a separate video that reviews these wheels. Switching to a set of carbon wheels really changed my perspective on carbon wheels. The stiffness, the responsiveness of these wheels, it was not a subtle difference. It was a night and day difference when I started riding carbon wheels. And that is the one change that a lot of people ask me, you know, how can I upgrade my bike? What should I do? If you can change the wheels, that is the absolute #1 upgrade that I would recommend on any bike, especially a mountain bike. And on something like a cyclocross bike and a gravel bike, it's nice to have carbon wheels, but because you're cornering so hard and so frequently in rougher terrain on a mountain bike, I think the carbon makes the most sense for the wheels. And so that's why, again, I wanted to put the money into the frame. Would I like to have a carbon frame? Yeah, but you know, I've got 4 bikes, so I've got to have a budget and I've got to stick to it. So that's why I went with this aluminum frame for my cross-country bike. So this bike comes in under 23 or under 24 pounds. I think it's about 23.8, maybe a little less than that. The cassette really helps to lower the weight. When I changed the cassette from a normal mountain bike cassette, it dropped quite a bit of weight. A lot of people are surprised at how much this bike weighs with the aluminum frame, but I do have a carbon bar, carbon stem, which is really light, and of course the wheels are really light. I like Fox suspension. I pretty much will stick with Fox just because I'm real familiar with how it works. And so usually when I buy a bike, I try to make sure I get Fox suspension. Another budget choice that I have on this bike is the XT instead of XTR. XT is just really solid. The only disadvantage would be that it's a little bit heavier than XTR. And XT brakes, again, they're my favorite brake. They are fairly light and they're easy to work on. And so that's my cross-country bike. Next I'll move to my cyclocross race bike. This is a 2016 Giant TCX Advanced 1. This is the top of the line model. And again, it's a carbon frame. That's what the advanced means, and that's what Giant calls their carbon. Giant makes excellent carbon. Giant actually will make bikes for other bike manufacturers. They make some for some of the big manufacturers, and I won't name the names, but they really have nailed down their carbon process. And this bike is very compliant. I've ridden some carbon frames that are really stiff, which they're light and they're fast, but over a long ride or a race, the bumps kind of get to you. So this bike has some really good compliance, really good stiffness when I sprint, and so I really like this bike a lot. Now I will talk about my gravel bike next, but the reason that I have two cyclocross type bikes, and like I've mentioned this in my other videos, but it's really the setup. So I have this bike kept set up for racing. I don't want to have to switch wheels every Monday and Friday during cyclocross race season, or put on another water bottle cage, that kind of thing. So cyclocross season is still a few months away, so I have some larger tires. I will ride this bike on gravel roads a lot. This is a very versatile bike. This bike makes a really good gravel bike. In fact, this is a 2016 model. 2017s just came out recently, as far as on the website. They're probably not available yet. But Giant has taken this bike and made an SX model, which is really just a 1x with a wider gear range. So this one goes up to a 28 in the back. The SX goes up to a 42, and it's got bigger tires, and they call it their kind of gravel race bike. It's the exact same frame, same geometry, everything's the same, and that really speaks to the versatility of this bike. This could easily be a gravel grinder for me. The bottom bracket's a little bit higher than my gravel bike. It's a little bit more agile, maybe a little bit less comfortable over a really long ride, but this bike is very versatile. Like I said, I keep bigger tires on. These are 40C tires. When cyclocross race season comes around, I will put 32s. I will take off a water bottle cage, and other than that, that's pretty much how I have it set up for cyclocross racing. So that's my cyclocross bike. Now I'll move over to my gravel bike, and I'll probably mention a few more things about the cyclocross bike when I talk about this one, because the first thing that I want to do is talk about the differences in my gravel bike and the cyclocross bike. So this one has 160 millimeter rotors as opposed to 140 on the cyclocross bike. This is also a 2x11 system, has a 1132 cassette in the back, and this one, as you saw, is a 1x system. 1x works great for cyclocross. For gravel grinding, I prefer having two chain rings in the front, because you don't want a really wide cassette in the back, at least for me, because you skip around a lot in the gears. When you're riding a gravel bike, you really could be holding the same speed within a mile an hour or two for about an hour. I mean, if it's on a flat road. If you have a wide jump in the back of the cassette, you may be trying to find the right gear. On a mountain bike ride, your speed is constantly varying, so your cadence is constantly changing. So that's why I really prefer the 2x system on a gravel bike. Some other differences on this bike: it's got mechanical shifting, whereas the cross bike has Di2. I really love Di2 for cross racing. If you've seen some of my videos, I've really been up and down about Di2. I had some problems before, but this Di2 system on this bike has been working great. I am shifting all the time in a cyclocross race. I mean, constantly. So it's nice to have the Di2. On the gravel bike, I don't want Di2. I like the simplicity of mechanical. If I'm on a really long ride or a trip, I don't want to have any problems with a battery or anything like that. I'm just being able to change out the cable if there ever is an issue. The tires that I have on this bike are 38C tires, and they're a little bit more slick than the current 40C tires I have on my cyclocross bike. The reason I like the knobbier tires on my cross bike is there's a lot of times where I will ride my cross bike on trails. So the typical riding, this is, again, it's so versatile. I will take this thing out on my local trails, which, by the way, start right there. It's behind my office. That goes back to about 35 miles of trails. And this bike is bumpy. I mean, you got to be really precise on your lines. You cannot be lazy. If you hit a root hard and you don't bunny hop it, or ride really light over it, it will ping the heck out of you. But that to me, it kind of adds to the fun factor of riding a cyclocross bike on trails. You really got to be on your game. I also like doing it because it increases my skills on a cyclocross bike. It really teaches me to handle the bike, and it also gives me more confidence on my mountain bike. So when I jump back on my cross-country bike after riding the cross bike on trails, I feel like I can just fly. So again, increases the skill level, and it's fun. Now the reason I prefer the cyclocross bike on trails is because it's more agile than the gravel bike. The gravel bike would be fine on trails, don't get me wrong. You could easily ride that thing on trails. But because the bottom bracket is higher on this bike, it allows you to clear obstacles a little bit better. So if I'm bunny hopping a log on a trail, it's nice to have a higher bottom bracket. And the geometry on this bike is really aggressive, really sharp handling. And so because our trails are really tight and twisty, I prefer the more aggressive geometry of the cyclocross bike on trails. So back over to the gravel bike. Those are the main differences between the cross bike and the gravel bike. I did mention the geometry. The geometry on this bike is more stable. The head angle is a little slacker, bottom bracket's lower. So what that does is it makes for a bike that doesn't require as much steering input on long rides. So if you're on a 3, 4, 5, 6+ hour ride, you know, having to keep a bike in line is going to make you more fatigued. Plus, for gravel events, you're more likely to be up in the mountains where you're really coming fast down a mountain, and so that's why I like this geometry. I've mentioned all that in other videos, so I'm not really going to go more into that. Now, the other difference, of course, is the fact that this is a steel frame, and I absolutely love the way this bike rides. This bike is slowly becoming one of my favorite bikes. I put a lot of miles on this bike. I probably put more miles on this bike than I do any other bike that I have in my fleet. Just because of where I live, it's so easy to just go out the back door and start riding and get on gravel roads. We've got a really good system of gravel roads where I live. The gravel riding scene is really big. There's a lot of people who ride gravel, a lot of events in my area. So I just absolutely love riding gravel. Now, I will mention that when it comes time to do a gravel like race or a really fast group ride or event, I use my cyclocross bike with these tires or with my 32s. This bike is several pounds lighter, probably 3 pounds lighter than my gravel bike. So this bike, I do have a power meter on it. I've got the Stages power meter. There it is. And so I use this bike for my interval training, which I've been doing a lot of lately. Just started back into that, getting ready for cyclocross season. I don't have a power meter on any of my other bikes, and it does, of course, connect to the Garmin. And I will mention that I use my Garmin on all my bikes. I've got Garmin mounts on all of my bikes, so I just take the Garmin off, and I don't use a wheel sensor, cadence sensor, anything like that. I do get cadence picked up from my power meter, but I don't have any other sensors. I use GPS for all of my tracking. So going back to the steel frame, if you've never ridden a steel frame, you just got to try it. It's really compliant. It's not the lightest thing in the world. It's probably why a lot of bike manufacturers don't produce steel. And that's the only thing I can think of, because when you ride steel, you will ask yourself, why aren't more bikes made with steel? Unless you just need the absolute lightest carbon or even aluminum bike, steel is just a great quality, great ride quality, and so I really like this steel bike. The gravel roads that I ride on are a lime rock based, and with all the heavy rain that we get here in Florida in the summertime, they can get really pitted, they can get potholes, and you can hit some pretty hard bumps. In fact, I was riding yesterday, and just there was a pothole in the shadows. I didn't see it, and I pinged it hard. And you know, I like having this bike because I don't necessarily want to beat up my cyclocross bike day after day after day on gravel rides. Most of my riding, in my weeks I should say, are probably 2 days on the mountain bike and then 3 or 4 days on gravel roads. A couple other things I want to mention about the gravel bike before I move on. It does have a carbon fork. This is a very stiff fork. It can be a tad harsh. I kind of wonder what this would be like with a steel fork. I mean, it's not too bad, but it is very stiff and very precise. And when I'm going on a really rough road, this bike will track very precisely. I do have 2 water bottle cages on this bike. It has room for a third. I may do that later on, but I usually carry 1 in my jersey and 2 in here, and then I'll fill up halfway on a gravel ride. My gravel rides typically are between 60 and 80 miles. I've actually got a 100-mile gravel ride planned tomorrow. That's probably one of the longer ones I'll do. But again, A lot of miles on this bike. It's very comfortable over over roads. And while I'm thinking about it, I want to mention some similarities that I have between all of my bikes, and that is they are all set up tubeless. I don't have any tubes, and I use Shimano XT pedals on all of my bikes. And I'll show the trail bike in a minute, but I've got the trail pedals and I've got cross-country XT pedals on all of my other ones. That's kind of the older model. On the cross bike and the cross-country bike, I've got the newer model XT, and they work really well. I just really love XT pedals. Now I'll move to the fourth bike, last bike in my fleet, and that is my Giant Trance Advance. This is a 2016, and this is the Advanced 1, which is not the top of the line, it's the second one down. I'll mention that this is a carbon frame, and I've said this before in my other videos, but the reason I went with the carbon frame because I got this as a complete package and I got a really good deal on this bike. I didn't really intend to get the carbon frame, but I did want carbon wheels. My previous Trance, I had a set of flow wheels, and those are not flimsy wheels by any means, but after riding those Valors that I showed on my cross-country bike, I got back on my Trance with the flow wheels and I could feel the flex, and it was driving me crazy. And so I knew my next trail bike needed to have carbon wheels. Now, let me say something here, and that is, I sometimes ask myself which bike in my fleet that I would get rid of if I had to. And I'm building a house right now, and I've really asked myself that question lately. And I would have to say, if I had to go down to 3 bikes and get rid of one, it would probably be this one, because I only really use this bike for vacations. Now the thing is, my vacations up in the mountains are probably the funnest type riding that I do. But unfortunately, it's the very least frequent type of riding that I do, especially with kids and all the stuff going on. I only get up there about 3 times a year. So this bike actually has the least amount of miles of any of my bikes. Now I still use it around my local trails sometimes, especially in the fall when there's a lot of leaves on the trail and I want some really knobby tires. So I'm not really going to go into the specifics of this bike because I've done that in the review. But again, the primary reason I have this is for just going on trips, and I love it. I mean, this bike rides awesome. You can see my review on it. It is just a really sweet riding bike. I don't ever feel like I need the Trance SX. I feel like this one does just fine. The SX has a longer fork on it. It's a little bit more aggressive. So just real quick, the main differences between this and my cross-country bike: it's got a dropper post, longer travel, it's got bigger tires, and so it just makes it a lot more capable when you're flying down a hill, because I love long climbs and I love flying down the hill. Could I use my Anthem up in the mountains? Absolutely. That bike would be totally fine. In fact, I would definitely get up the climbs faster on the Anthem. But coming down, descending on a trail on a mountain bike is just, it's a blast. And if you do that type of riding, you know exactly what I mean. This bike only has 1 water bottle holder, so I typically will use a Camelback when I ride with this bike up in the mountains. Like I said before, it does have the XT trail pedals, so these have a bigger platform. And the main thing that does, if you don't know, is it just gives you more surface area in case you have to clip out. So as you can see, 3 of the 4 bikes in my fleet are Giant. There's a few reasons behind that. People have asked me this. I'm not sponsored by Giant, but I do get good deals at my local shop. So my local bike shop that I have kind of a racing sponsorship through, they are a Giant and Niner dealer. And so that's why I ride Giant, and also because I really appreciate the value that you get with Giant for the money. You get really good component spec. Giant also doesn't use a lot of proprietary type components, and they use pretty off-the-shelf type, XT or Fox or SRAM, whatever. They don't really have a lot of proprietary components, which I like. If you're traveling, you got a problem, it's so much easier to go to a bike shop and buy a component that will just go right on the bike. So that's why I ride Giant. I also like Niner bikes. You see my video that I test rode the new RKT 29. I really enjoyed that bike, and I do consider maybe getting that one day. Another thing that's worth mentioning about my fleet is the fact that my mountain bikes are both 27.5. I get a lot of questions about that. The trails that I ride are very tight and twisty. There's a lot of decelerating, accelerating, and just cornering hard, and I just really love the 27.5 wheels. So much so that I ask myself why every bike manufacturer doesn't make a 27.5 cross-country bike. I also love full suspension, and I've been that way for a while. I've had a lot of hardtails over the years. Just my trails are kind of, you know, they're not really long sustained climbs that I ride most of the time, and so that's why I like full suspension, because I'm in my saddle a lot, and we have a lot of roots, and so with a hardtail you'd have to get out of your saddle a lot more. But back to the 27.5, I've owned a lot of 29ers, a lot. Mainly cross-country and trail, and I like 29ers. I like the way they're going. I really like the way the chain stays are getting shorter. They're getting really fast, but I have no problems at all keeping up with guys on 29ers on this 27.5. So you know, obviously Giant really pushes 27.5 for various reasons, but they do it really well, and the Meister suspension works really well with 27.5. So that's why I ride 27.5. I could go 27.5 or 29 for cross country, especially with the new Niner RKT. I could really flip a coin and go with either one. For a trail bike, I prefer 27.5. I don't think I'd ever go with a 29er for my height. I'm a little under 5'9", and so that would be a pretty big bike with 140 millimeters of travel and a 29er. So I will probably stick with 27.5 in the near future. You know, bikes are changing so fast. Another question I get a lot is, would I go with 27.5 plus? As of today, I've actually never ridden a 27.5 plus. Bad points about them. I'd love to try one, but I cannot really make that determination until I get some time on one. I do like the agility of a regular 27.5 wheel for the type of trails that I ride, so I probably would stick with a regular 27.5. But you know, like I said, bikes are changing so fast, and you know, that's why I just want to say that one reason I like cyclocross and gravel is the bikes are so simple. They're so low maintenance, and it's just, you know, the technology's not changing so fast that you feel like your bike's obsolete the week after you buy it. So that's kind of the phase we're going through with mountain biking. It's a little annoying, but at least the bikes are really progressing. So there you go, that's my bike fleet, and I'm shooting this last little scene indoors because those crickets were driving me crazy, but it's summertime and they come out sometime in the evening like that, so sorry about that. Anyway, as always, if you have any questions or comments for me, leave them below, and if you found this type of video helpful for you, just please give it a thumbs up for me. Thanks for watching.